At the podium back.
I'm just going to break the podium.
Yeah, let me do it then.
All right, hold on. Let me just move my microphone around. Perfect. All right. First of all, thank you very much. It's not every day that this many academics get to sit in a room with representatives of industry and have a chance to grill you or ask you questions. I have about 100, but I know that there are a lot of people who have questions, so questions from the audience. We'll take two, and then so one there and one in the back, and then we'll.
Thank you. They were all really good presentations, so really exciting stuff. I just want to touch on something that was mentioned by a few people today. I think Evelyn started the conversation about congestion pricing earlier, and I'll paraphrase slightly, but the need to kind of stop subsidizing travel by cars through the use of pricing was something you raised, and some of the speakers also mentioned that as well. Malcolm, you said about like Uber are generally supportive of congestion pricing, and Kevin, you touched on it briefly at the end as well. I think in terms of the equity considerations of congestion pricing, the concerns are generally driven by the pricing low-income households off the road, and they're legitimate concerns. And the responses are often around how you would use the revenue that's generated from congestion pricing. So you can design the system to implement things like caps or rebates or exemptions or discounts to ensure that people are maybe heavily or very negatively impacted or somehow mitigated. That could mean low-income households are getting some kind of a discount or a rebate, or businesses that need to drive are somehow discounted or getting a rebate. Other options could include cost offsets. So Vancouver found that by implementing congestion pricing, you could raise up to a maximum of like $1.6 billion per year in annual net revenue, which is equivalent to TransLink's entire operating budget. So you could do a lot of things with that money. You could offset fuel taxes. You could make transit free.
Hurry a little bit.
Sorry, yeah, I will quick. And in terms of picking up on the cred-based things that we refer to, like the caps, rebates, exemptions, and discounts, it got me thinking about what that could look like in a world of shared vehicles, where I assume that someone like Uber, while supportive of it, would offset those costs to the users. And I'm curious to know how that could manifest itself for low-income users. Are they still discounted? Are they exempt from it? Or are there ways of addressing that? And it's predominantly, the question is to you, Malcolm.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you touched on a lot of things that I would have said if we had a little bit more time. But I think generally speaking, we think there's value in incentivizing shared use. And so there's yet to be a sort of robust expansion of congestion pricing in a new place where we were operating before it happened. But you can imagine some sort of opportunity where if you're using a shared model, then you don't pay it, or the cost is deferred in some way. I think generally speaking, we are much more favorable to cost structures that disproportionately pass the burden off to people who aren't sharing vehicles versus those who are. I think that's the manifestation for local taxes. I think that could be the manifestation for congestion pricing schemes. But if we have sort of a brute force tactic that spreads the burden across everyone, then I think we're disincentivizing the very behavior that's actually going to be more advantageous in the long term. So shared rides, I think generally speaking, are always something that we want to sort of carve out because it's better for everyone.
Question in the back.
Yeah, my question was for Andrew at Sidewalk Labs, but it also kind of touches on the last presentation as well. So despite looking to try to promote a car-free lifestyle, the Sidewalk Labs site is located right to the Gardiner Expressway, a large elevated highway, which will likely encourage driving to and from the site. So I'm wondering if it's part of Sidewalk Labs' vision to promote removing that part of the highway, something that's been debated in the city on and off for the past number of years.
The site is located right under the Gardiner. That's absolutely true. We can't forget it because every time we're trying to do work and a transport truck goes by, we don't just hear it, we feel it. The whole building shakes. But there's not a good access point to the Gardiner. You have to go all the way west to Jarvis to find one. And then to the east, there isn't one. It sort of peters out into east of the Don. So there's not really, even if it was not contrary, I think, to our principles, even if we wanted to address the Gardiner in some way, we really couldn't. But let's imagine that we had a magic wand that could make it disappear. Then just to the north, immediately to the north of the Gardner, is the East Lakeshore East rail bed, which serves just as effectively as a barrier cutting off the waterfront from the rest of the city. So there, we did consider, we considered a few things, but it's just not fruitful to look at the north part of the site. There's always going to be a barrier there. So we have focused our efforts more on making sure that we've got good transit connections and we've got good east-west active transport connections. Ultimately, transit and then east-west active transport with a certain amount of coming down Parliament is going to be how people reach our site. So no, I don't think we have any particular aspirations towards doing anything with the Gardner. It's just sort of a fait accompli we have to accept.
I also had a question for you, Andrew. I'm just wondering, you said there's 2,000 units, I think, approximately. And so I was wondering what percentage of those are low income, and then what considerations have you given to access for schools and things like that, and larger families? Like, are they 3 and 4 bedroom units, that kind of thing, and access to amenities for families?
So the site is currently zoned for 20% affordable. Any developer developing the site would have to have 1 in 5 of their units be affordable. We're going to make it 2 in 5. So we're going to 40% of those units are going to be affordable. A certain proportion of those are going to be what's called deeply affordable. So less than 60% of the prevailing market rate in the city. And we can achieve that because a lot of our other building innovations allow us to subsidize those units and still make money on provision of the other units. You are right that one of the problems with the cities today that we have identified is that cities are increasingly playgrounds for the young and the rich, that the infrastructure of cities does not easily accommodate itself to family living. So we are trying to address that too. So in the first place, there will be a school on our site. It's going to be in the southeast corner, just immediately east of Parliament Slip. So we will have a school, we will have a community center, so we will have amenities for family living in the city. We will also, and this is, I don't have time to go into this, but this at a high level, we believe that the way that you make urban space work in any configuration is that it's got to be very modular and flexible. So what happens is that as a family grows, they need more space. Our units, the walls are, and I don't have time to go into how, but trust me, the walls are much more flexible. So if you decide that you want to expand your unit by one whole room, that will be possible to do. So it'll be possible to move in not having family space and then upsize to family size. So the units that we will have will be very capable of transforming themselves to meet the needs of any group that wishes to live there, or rather not group, but any slice of the demography of the city. So that is very much one of our goals.
Thanks. My question's for Andrew. In your presentation and in the Sidewalk Labs plan, there's a lot of kind of big ideas that are put forward, right?
Yes.
Yeah, certainly. Even beyond the ones that you talked about today. But when we look back at the history of planning big sites, even the recent history of smart cities, we can see a lot of people put forward huge ideas, but often when it comes to implementation, we don't really see what has been promised in the projects when they're completed, right? Because they run into challenges that they didn't predict at the times that they were putting forward their big ideas. And we even see that with tech companies who are putting forward big ideas for cities, you know, with Uber saying that they'll reduce congestion and then increasing congestion in the cities that they enter. So my question to you is, how do you plan to ensure that doesn't happen with Sidewalk Labs? Given the history and given that you're a company that has never kind of done this on this scale before, how can we trust that you'll ensure that all these big ideas actually come to fruition? And in your presentation, you said that it would be akin to Hudson Yards in New York, which was on one of your slides. And that's kind of an area that has been really criticized as being an area for the rich, as you just said. Whereas you're promoting this as kind of like a more inclusive area.
And I'm just going to ask Andrew that in your response, you focus on the mobility and equity piece in particular.
Okay, that was 3 questions, and now on a mobility and equity lens on an answer. I'm not sure this is going to do anyone any satisfaction, but here goes. As a headline, I would say, first of all, we think if you look at why smart cities have failed, we did. We spent our first year as a firm doing nothing but studying previous instances of smart cities, which were all failures, and trying to figure out why that they failed. And the common denominator to why they all failed was they tried to do one thing and one thing only. So to Shauna's point, you could imagine doing a smart city development that would only focus on mobility. We're going to have a kick-ass mobility system that makes sure that everyone can get here. But if you're not also trying to make sure that people can afford to live there, if you're not also trying to make sure that it is green and can generate its own sustainable energy, that's when you fall down. Paradoxically, you make more progress by moving on all fronts at once to achieve the synergies between them than trying to pick one and really run up those numbers, because the city life is not, we aren't just robots, we are full people with a variety of needs, so you need to tackle all those needs at once. So searching for mobility equity isn't something that can be done in a vacuum, which is why you've heard from all of us who are private sector people about the need for regulation and smart government control, because it's not something that one firm can do on its own. And that would speak to the second point too, which is that Sidewalk Labs is not a bunch of pirates that sailed in on Lake Ontario in the night. We were invited by Waterfront Toronto. Waterfront Toronto isn't going anywhere. We responded to their request for proposals. They are our partner, and they are going to continue to be our partner. And they are responsive to the 3 orders of government that make up the City of Toronto. So because we have this strong partner in Waterfront Toronto, I think the residents of the city can be comfortable knowing that we have a strong commitment, and we've got someone who is going to hold us to our commitments. And if you saw the tone of the newspaper coverage on October 31st, you can see that that is in fact what they have done. They do not shy from their responsibility to safeguard the public trust. So I think that while skepticism is always healthy, I think in this case there's ample evidence to show that it's not warranted in this case.
And Aaron, you have the honor of being the last questioner on this.
Okay, it's more of a comment, sorry, but I just wanted to comment on the comments made by the gentleman from Uber, about not keeping track of demographics. Just a view from south of the border, it's kind of a core principle of anti-discrimination law that you monitor the demographics of your clients to ensure discrimination is not occurring. So, but this includes not only public accommodations like schools, but also bank loans and a whole lot of different private sector activities. So it makes it really difficult to understand the discriminatory practices in TNCs. I just wanted to make a comment on that because you pointed out a few times that you cannot, for privacy reasons, record the demographics of your clients, but it's actually a huge disadvantage for ensuring anti-discrimination. So.
Would anyone like to comment?
Yeah, just say we've heard that, and we've also heard the exact opposite from underserved communities, from black and brown communities, from communities that have reticence around a private company having access to that information. So totally take your point, recognize the ways in which that has been valuable in mitigating disparate impact and discriminatory behavior in other industries, but just recognize that I think in a lot of ways, I think you're right, and I think there are a lot of folks who would say the exact opposite, but I think that's fair.
And one thing to add to it, I think that's why we value our partnerships with the research community. I think we've done, as mentioned before, research with Anne Brown in terms of doing studies and doing experiments on are people of different ethnicities or with names that have different ethnic sounding names, like are they getting lower service levels? And I think that's something that we find valuable and that we look to continue to do with the research community.
And actually, Stephen, as the workshop coordinator, facilitator, lead, has the prerogative of the actual last question.
Actually, Jonathan, you answered it. Because I remember during your talk you said that one of the ways that you wanted to address that lack of information was to
to work with the research community, but it wasn't clear to me exactly what that meant or what we can do, because we similarly won't be able to link, except via surveying, or some very small sample kind of data analyses, we wouldn't be able to have that information either. So was your vision to use that opportunity to generate new data somehow at the individual level about users? Or?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the previous research that we have done have their own limitations, and that they're sort of point in time survey based. And that, I think, is something to think about for the future. I don't think we have the answer in terms of what the ideal scenario is in terms of collecting this data and being able to, say, do ongoing monitoring and ongoing evaluation of whether or not certain transport systems are discriminatory. So I think that's an open question. It's an excellent question, and something that we hope to continue to have a dialogue about.
Great. Thank you very much to all of you.